But I wanted to talk about this theme, thriving in a world of accelerating change, innovating every day. And as I was getting ready, it's nice piano music too, as I was getting ready for this discussion and reflecting on this audience, I thought about what I consider to be my first experience with innovation. This goes back about 20 years ago. Here's me at the time. At the time, I was the managing editor of a daily newspaper. You can probably guess from the picture that this was not the New York Times or the Boston Globe, but this was my college newspaper. I went to a very small school called Dartmouth College, nestled in the state of New Hampshire. It's in the tiny town of Hanover that has about 5,000 people when school isn't in session, about 9,000 when school is in session. Yet we managed every day to put out a small paper, 8, 12, 16-page mini-tab. About 20 years ago, I was the managing editor of that paper. Netscape had just introduced its browser. The World Wide Web was on everyone's lips. And we had to decide what we should do in the face of this potentially seismic shift to our business. We did what came naturally to us, which was nothing. We were one of the last newspapers in our peer group to put our newspaper on the web. There was a story about it in our paper in 1995 where I was quoted saying, "We've got a relatively small team and it wasn't high on our list of priorities." That was one reason we didn't do it. We also were pretty scared. The quote went on to say, "The newspaper makes a lot of revenues from subscriptions." We didn't know what business model would work online. People are still trying to figure that out. And in face of uncertainty, we did what so many executives did, which is freeze. Then what did we do when we went onto the web? College students have changed the world. Your company, Google, the company represented here, of course, founded by people in a university. Zuckerberg gives the world Facebook. Gates drops out of Harvard to create Microsoft. What did we do? What almost every media company did. A word-for-word, pixel-for-pixel replication of the print version online. Not thinking what we can do differently, our strategic intent was to find people going through the web and convince them to subscribe to the print version of the newspaper. This is what you naturally do in the face of a disruptive change to an industry. You hesitate, you worry, you replicate, you don't innovate, you don't recreate. I experienced this firsthand when I began to consult to the newspaper industry in the United States. Fast forward now to the mid part of the last decade. We were hired by the American Press Institute, a leading trade industry, to save the U.S. newspaper industry. You can see that didn't quite work out. This is a telltale quote as we started this project. "I don't know what to do, but I am ready to do it." This was the sentiment in the industry around 2005. So we did the best we could. We gave people a blueprint for transformation. We gave them the tools and the techniques and thoughts about how they might drive change. But we know how this story ended. The U.S. newspaper industry has essentially been eviscerated. In the last 5 years, 70 years of economic growth have just been wiped out. I truly experienced this firsthand over the past few years. In 2009, I was asked to join the board of directors of a regional media company called Media General. Back in 2005, this is what the company looked like. About $1 billion in revenue, 25 newspapers, 20 broadcast stations, 7,000 employees, $1.4 billion market capitalization. Like many media industries, it struggled particularly with the newspaper side of its business. Last year, it sold its last newspaper, completely exiting the business. By the time you got to the beginning of this year, it was a very different and much smaller organization. $360 million in revenue, 0 newspapers, ending a string of 140 years of continued operations. Many fewer employees and a much smaller market capitalization. This transformation was brutal. This was a smart leadership team that was doing everything it could to adapt to the forces at work. This is one of the realities we all have to face in today's era. Change happens, it happens punishingly fast, and it has punishing repercussions. Here's one simple way to frame up this pace of change. The chart here shows the average lifespan of a company on the Standard & Poor's Index of the 500 largest publicly traded companies on U.S. equity markets. You go back to about 1960, the average lifespan is about 60 years. Which means if you worked for one of these companies, your parents might have worked there, your kids might work there as well. Today, that number is heading down to about 12 years, which means you certainly are not going to spend your entire career at one of these, let alone your parents or kids. In fact, at this rate, 75% of the companies on the Standard & Poor's 500 index, the largest, most powerful companies in the world, will not be on that index in 15 years. 75%. This is what we have to deal with today, a pace of change that we have never seen before. So I've tried lots of different ways to arm people with the tools to respond to this change, but I thought today I'd try something a little different. As they say, a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I'm going to try to give you about 7,000 words of guidance by going through the 7 pictures that are up here. There will be a few more PowerPoint slides behind them, but these will be the 7 images that will guide my tips to you today. After I go through each of them, I'll, again, assuming I haven't babbled too much, give you time to ask me a few questions. So first picture here. Anyone recognize what movie this is from? Shawshank Redemption, one of my favorite movies. Does anyone know the line that is being cited right here? Get busy living, get busy dying. Get busy living or get busy dying. How about a round of applause to the gentleman in the back? Not only did you get it correct, we could all hear you in this room, which is impressive. Get busy living or get busy dying. The first thing you have to come to grips with if you are to deal with innovation in today's tough times is the mortality of your business. The mortality of your brands, the mortality of your business model. Every business is dying. Every business will die. You have to wake up every morning and recognize this. We are in an era where competitive advantage disappears in the blink of an eye. If all you do is try to maintain today's business, I guarantee, just like Nokia, just like BlackBerry, just like Eastman Kodak, just like on and on and on, you are sowing the seeds of your own destruction. You want to get busy living, right? So you need to think about innovation to bring you to new markets and new spaces. Let's get to our second image then. Mind the gap. If you're trying to think as a leader, how are we going to drive innovation and growth in our business, the first thing you need to understand is the nature of the problem you're trying to solve. What does innovation really need to deliver for your enterprise? The reality is, in most companies, if you look at your future target, what you hope to achieve in your organization, and you look at the investments that you're making in growth today, there is a big gap between those two numbers. This is the way it usually plays out. I can pretty much predict what a company's growth rate and what a company's growth characteristics look like if I just get a few variables. So every company's got some kind of vision statement. It ends in the year YY, which typically has a 5 or 0 at the end of it, 2015, 2020, 2025. X is the size of today's business. Most people pick a nice round number saying, let's double today's business. They say, what % of our business will be new businesses we're not in today? Well, it's pretty hard, so we're not going to have it be too high, but if it's too low, it's not very empowering. So we'll make that 20%, and then Y is the growth rate in the core business. It's simple math to solve for it. I bet you if you look at your company, you're within plus or minus 2 points here. So one simple example of this, Vision 2020, if you're going to double any company and have 20% be new growth, your core business has to grow at 7% a year. Seems like a pretty mundane number, but Rita McGrath from Columbia has done research on this. She looked at a sample of all companies with above $1 billion in revenue and found only 7% of them could maintain a growth rate of above 6% a year for 5 consecutive years. Even these seemingly mundane figures are incredibly hard in today's fiercely competitive world. When you start putting real numbers around this, it can get pretty scary. If you're a $2.5 billion company, if you want to get to a $5 billion company, not only do you need $1.5 billion more in your core, you need an extra $1 billion in growth that you don't have. That's an incredibly difficult thing to do. If you're honest about it, what we see inside most companies is something like this. You will fight like crazy to keep your core business where it is. If you can get anything in the next few years for new growth, that's pretty good. So you're happy with a 1 or 2% growth rate. Now, this is okay as long as you know that this is the problem that you've got to solve. Every time we have done this with a company where we've tried to look at that gap between the target and what they're currently investing in, there are 4 truths that we've found. Leadership is never aligned. They might have vague alignment around the target, but you get them all in a room together and ask them specifics, and they all give different answers. The risk in the core business is higher than people thought. Growth investments are insufficient, and the gap between the present and future is almost always larger. Once you recognize your mortality, once you recognize the growth gap is larger than you thought, you then can begin to think about the third area. What do we do?